The Switch 2 announcement could just as easily have come from Apple rather than Nintendo, and that's not just the pricing strategy, but if you look closely, a lot of the highlight features on the Switch 2 have been around for quite a while in various guises across handhelds and console gaming. But just as Apple tends to bide its time and release many of these features at precisely the right moment, will Nintendo have a level of polish that just can't be replicated by the competition? You only have to look at the Lenovo Legion Go to see that Nintendo's new mouse mode on the Joy-Con accessories isn't exactly novel. The right-hand controller on the Legion Go has a feature called FPS mode, which means you can detach it from the screen and use it as a mouse. It's not necessarily the most comfortable experience out of the box, so there are tons of third-party printed elements and accessories you can buy to attach on and make it a lot more comfortable. I'm not sure how many people are actually playing first-person shooters with the Legion Go controller, but I found it really useful playing strategy games like Football Manager or Sid Meier's Civilization. While I'm very glad that it exists though, it is often very frustrating in combination with all the hang-ups you get from running a Windows handheld. Let's say you have to restart your computer while it's in this FPS mode. You'll actually have to reattach your controllers and then take them off again once the system's turned on to actually continue playing in that way. Little things like this can be really frustrating and just get in the way of your experience. Looking at accounts of Nintendo's approach, it's going to be a much more seamless experience where you can simply lift the controller up and have it operate as a normal Joy-Con, put it down and instantly get into mouse mode. I think they've also probably realized that holding it like a standard mouse rather than a vertical one is going to be a more natural and more comfortable experience for the majority of people. It also looks like you can actually just use mouse mode on your lap in front of the TV, which is a really cool innovation too. So here we are seeing one area where Nintendo has waited, taking a look at the competition and created something which I think is going to be a lot better. One area where they might not be able to do that entirely is with the display. Now, having a 120Hz VRR display is pretty much the holy grail for a lot of gamers out there, but there will be a lot of conversation around whether the LCD was worth going for over the OLED. You only have to look at the Legion Go screen to see how beautiful and vibrant it can be on an LCD, but at the same time you do get a lot of glare and it doesn't always do a great job with dark colours. The Switch 2 is aiming to get beyond that by using HDR, so it'll give you a lot more dynamic range and hopefully be a bit punchier in the whites and a bit deeper in the darks. But when you do have exceptional OLED screens like on the Steam Deck OLED and even the Ayaneo Pocket DMG, Nintendo will have to do some convincing to prove that LCD was the right decision. A big question will also be if many titles can even make the most of that 120Hz VRR display. It definitely looks like games like Cyberpunk and Street Fighter are going to run in a similar level of performance that they do on the Steam Deck. That is to say that third-party titles at least probably won't push all the way up to 120Hz. It's more likely that this display will just give you a smoother experience playing at lower frame rates, closer to 50, 60. Which begs the question, if the likes of Valve are going to release new handhelds in the future, are they going to be able to leapfrog the Switch 2 in a pretty short amount of time? To be honest, I don't think that's too likely, at least on the immediate horizon. If you look at the specs of the Lenovo Legion Go 2, for example, it's not going to be strides ahead of the Legion Go. The reality is that these handhelds may not move enough volume to actually make it worth companies investing in bespoke chips that really help them to run with the required level of power and efficiency for them to actually make big improvements going forward. That's likely to become even more difficult with the situation around tariffs. That means Nintendo is probably not going to be competing with any huge leaps in power in terms of handheld gaming for a long time. I think the big question for Nintendo will be whether it's worth kind of going to their walled garden to buy these third-party titles when you can probably get them on the likes of Steam a lot earlier, get them for a much lower price a lot of the time, and be able to play them on any PC that you own. So again, Nintendo is going to be reliant on its own first-party games library. Whether it can replicate the success that it had with the OG Switch. Because let's face it, the Switch was never the most powerful device, but it had such an incredible hit list of games, and it's got those huge franchises like Pokemon, which just bring people to the Switch on their own. I personally never really enjoyed Tears of the Kingdom, but it says a lot that they're kind of launching the Switch with upgrades of those two games. Surely they can't just make Breath of the Wild 3 on another iteration of the same map. But they also probably don't want to sacrifice a lot of the building and open world mechanics that kind of made it really special for a lot of people. Whether they can actually hit it out of the park again with another Zelda title remains to be seen. And we just really have to hope that Game Freak pull it together and actually make a Pokemon title that runs at a stable frame rate too. Beyond game titles though, it's interesting to see how Nintendo have responded to one of the biggest controversies about the Switch, and that is stick drift on the JoyCons. Pretty much every Nintendo Switch owner has experienced this at some point, and it can be incredibly infuriating. But it's interesting to see Nintendo haven't actually announced Hall effect sticks in the new JoyCons. Hopefully they've found some new technology or way of making them, which is going to be a lot more stable, but it is definitely a risk, and we'll have to wait and see how it actually plays out. Thirdly, with a raft of new online features, it's going to be really critical how well Nintendo actually handles that online environment. I can't tell you the amount of times that I've lost points trying to work my way up the Pokemon rank ladder just because the internet connection has cut out on Nintendo's side. So I really hope that alongside the new features, Nintendo are doing a lot of work in the back end to make that a much more stable environment. Especially because one of the main features they're actually talking about is the ability to stream GameCube games from their Nintendo Switch library. Maybe this explains what they've been doing proactively with some of their competition in the emulation space, you know, taking the likes of Yuzu down, but they've ended up in this situation where the ability to stream a select few GameCube games from Nintendo Switch Online, and even backwards compatibility with the Switch One, relies on some form of emulation. And the problem is that people can do this anyway. I'm not going to show any footage of emulating Nintendo games, but I can assure you that I've been playing the GameCube on my Neo Pocket DMG for a while now, and it runs really smoothly, beautiful experience in pretty much the right aspect ratio. Again, we have to wait and see what tariffs are going to do to the emulation market, because I think it could blow many of these small hardware companies out of the water. But Nintendo really has to ask this question whether streaming and emulation is really enough for people to pay that extra fee. In fact, game streaming is a whole new area of competition where Nintendo has to kind of prove that it's got what it takes. So both in terms of home console and the handheld experience, streaming games from a console or the cloud, I think the PlayStation Portal is a good place to look for competition around the house. The Switch 2 is obviously going to be a much better option if you're taking the Switch on a flight, leaving the house in any way. But if you're just sitting around the house and you have a good enough Wi-Fi network, then the PlayStation Portal is real competition to the Switch. You'll be able to stream games which are much more taxing by using that performance of the PlayStation 5 and simply displaying it on your PlayStation Portal. Plus, with a PlayStation subscription, you'll be able to access a whole range of games via streaming from the cloud. And so for me, not just when I sit down in front of the telly, but when that TV is occupied, the big test for me is which console am I going to grab more often, the Switch 2 or the PlayStation 5? Realistically, it'll probably just come down to which console releases the most exclusive titles. And to be honest, we haven't seen a huge amount of that from Sony since the PlayStation 5 launch, so maybe the Nintendo Switch is just going to leap ahead of it once we really get a sense of which games are going to come out. Anyway, hopefully this wasn't too much of a big ramble. Thanks so much for watching, and if you want more thoughts on the Nintendo Switch, check out this video here. I'll see you in the next one.